Hyun-soo stood in the grand hall of the Galactic Council. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely see the top. Crystal walls sparkled with lights from 1,000 different worlds. Around him sat creatures from across the galaxy, each one different from the last. Some had 6 arms, others breathed methane instead of air. A few glowed with their own inner light, but none of them looked happy to see him. Hyun-soo had been Earth's ambassador for 10 years. He had made this trip to the council station dozens of times. Each time he carried the same message from his home planet. Earth wanted to join the Galactic Council. Earth wanted to be part of the great community of stars. Each time, the answer was the same. No. Today would be different, Hyun-soo told himself. It had to be. Earth had worked so hard to prove itself worthy. They had stopped all wars on their planet. They had cleaned their oceans and skies. They had built ships that could travel between stars. Surely now the council would see that humans deserved a place among them. Ji-woo sat in the observer section, behind him. She was his closest aide and had become his friend over the years. She believed in this dream as much as he did. Her dark eyes watched the council members with hope, but also with worry. She had read the reports. She knew what the other species said about humans when they thought no one was listening. Too violent, they whispered. Too emotional. Too unpredictable. The great Velkari matriarch rose from her seat. Velthara was older than human civilization. Her people had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. Her skin looked like silver water, always moving and changing. When she spoke, her voice echoed through the hall like music. "Ambassador Hyun-soo of the 3rd planet of Sol system," she said. "You come before us again with the same request. Your species seeks membership in this council." "Yes, honored matriarch," Hyun-soo replied. He kept his voice steady, though his heart was beating fast. "Earth has met every requirement you have given us. We have proven our commitment to peace. Our technology has advanced greatly. We are ready to take our place among the stars." A sound like grinding metal came from the Korzak section. General Thekmor was laughing, if you could call it that. The Korzak looked like walking mountains of rock and metal. They had built the largest military force in the galaxy. Thekmor had conquered 17 star systems for the Council. "Ready?" Thekmor's voice boomed through the hall. "Your species discovered fire yesterday, by our measure. You built your first space station while my people were building their 3rd galactic empire. What could you possibly offer us?" Hyun-soo felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting emotional would only prove their point. "We offer a fresh perspective, General. New ideas. Different ways of solving problems." "Problems?" A thin voice came from the hegemony section. Counselor Zeftai looked like a walking stick insect, but his mind was sharp as a blade. "The only problem humans create is chaos. You fight each other over patches of dirt. You destroy your own environment for profit. You make decisions based on feelings instead of logic." "That was our past," Hyun-soo said. "We have grown beyond those mistakes." "Have you?" Velthara asked. "Your own reports show that crime still exists on Earth. Wars have ended, yes, but only because your governments finally learned to control your people properly. This is not growth. This is merely better chains." Ji-woo's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to stand up and shout at them. She wanted to tell them about human art and music and poetry. She wanted to describe the way humans could love so deeply that they would die for strangers. She wanted to explain that their emotions were not weakness but strength, but she stayed silent. This was Hyun-soo's moment. "We believe our emotions make us stronger," Hyun-soo said carefully. "They help us to understand others, to feel compassion, to make connections across different species and cultures." "Connections?" Thekmor's laugh was louder this time. "You mean like the connections you made with the Centauri colonies? Oh, wait. Those colonies exist. Because you destroyed your own planet's environment and needed somewhere else to live. Very compassionate indeed. Hyun-Soo's jaw tightened. The Centauri colonies were Earth's first successful settlements outside their solar system. They were proud of that achievement. But Thecamore made it sound like running away from a disaster. Our expansion into space represents human determination and innovation, Hyun-Soo said. We saw a problem and we solved it. We reached for the stars because we refused to give up. You reached for the stars because you had no choice, said another voice. This came from the Symphonic Union, a group of species that communicated through musical sounds. Your recklessness nearly destroyed your world. Only luck saved you. And now you want to bring that same recklessness into our perfect order, added HFY. You want to infect our carefully balanced civilization with your chaos. The word infect hit Hyun-Soo like a physical blow. That was what they really thought of humanity, not as potential partners, but as a disease. The Council has watched your species for 300 years, Velthara continued. We have seen you make the same mistakes over and over again. You learn nothing from history. You repeat the same cycles of violence and destruction. You are not ready for the responsibility that comes with membership in this council. When will we be ready? Hyun-Soo asked. What more must we do to prove ourselves? The hall fell silent. No one answered his question because they all knew the truth. There was no test humans could pass, no achievement that would change their minds. The council had already decided that humanity would never be worthy. The vote will now be taken, Velthara announced. One by one, the council members cast their votes. The display above the hall showed the results in real time. 847 votes against human membership, 3 votes in favor. The 3 came from the newest, members of the council, species that had joined within the last 1,000 years. They still remembered what it felt like to be outsiders. Everyone else had voted no. Hyun-Soo stood in the silence that followed. His life's work had just ended in complete failure. Behind him, he could hear Ji-woo crying softly. She tried to hide it, but he had worked with her long enough to know her sounds of grief. The council has spoken, Velthara said. Humanity is not ready for membership. Perhaps in another few thousand years, when your species has matured, we will consider your request again. A few thousand years. Hyun-Soo almost laughed at the absurdity of it. That was like telling a child to wait until the sun burned out before asking for dinner. There is one more thing, Thecamore said. His metal face showed what might have been amusement. The Council strongly suggests that humanity focus on its own solar system for the time being. Your expansion into the outer regions has been noted. It would be better for everyone if you stayed closer to home. That was not a suggestion. That was a threat. The Council was telling humanity to stop exploring, to stop growing, to stay in their tiny corner of the galaxy and accept that they would never be anything more than primitives. Hyun-Soo bowed formally to the Council. It was the last respect he would ever show them. Thank you for your consideration, he said. His voice was calm and polite, but inside he was burning with rage and humiliation. Earth will remember this day. As he turned to leave, he heard HFY whisper to another counselor. Let them remember, by the time they are advanced enough to matter, we will all be long dead. The counselor whispered back, if they survive that long. Both of them were laughing as Hyun-Soo and Ji-woo walked out of the Great Hall. Outside, Admiral Taemin was waiting for them. His uniform was crisp and his face was hard as stone. He had been listening to the entire session through his communication device. The look in his eyes told Hyun-Soo everything he needed to know. Admiral, Hyun-Soo said. Ambassador, Taemin replied. I've already sent orders to recall all human diplomatic missions. Our people will be off council stations within the week. And then, Taemin looked up at the stars visible through the station's crystal dome. Somewhere out there was Earth, small, and blue and supposedly insignificant. "Then we go home," he said, "and we remember what they said about us today. Every single word." Jiwoo wiped her eyes and stood straighter. The sadness was already turning into something else, something harder. "They think we're not ready," she said quietly. "Maybe they're right. Maybe we're not ready to be like them." Taemin nodded slowly. "Maybe we're meant to be something else entirely." As their ship pulled away from the council station, Hyun-soo looked back one last time at the crystal halls where he had spent so many years begging for acceptance. The anger in his chest was growing into something larger, something that would change everything. The council had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs. 5 years had passed since the council's rejection, and everything had changed. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of the UES horizon, watching the massive shipyards that now surrounded Earth like a metal ring. Hundreds of ships were being built. At once, each one larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever created before. The sight still amazed him, even after months of preparation. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving final passenger counts from the colony ships. All vessels report ready for departure." Minho nodded. Today was the day they had all been working toward. The day humanity would leave the inner galaxy behind and strike out for the rim worlds, far from council space and council rules. The rejection had hurt, but it had also freed them. For the first time in centuries, humans were united by a single purpose. They would build their own civilization among the stars, one that would never need to beg for acceptance from anyone. "Signal the fleet," Minho ordered. "All ships prepare for jump to hyperspace." Down in the engineering section, Hye-Jin checked the readings on her quantum drive one more time. She had designed this engine herself, working with a team of Earth's best scientists. It was faster than anything the Council used, more efficient, and completely different from their technology. The Council's ships used gravitational manipulation to bend space around them. Human ships punched holes through reality itself, stepping from one point in space to another in the blink of an eye. It was dangerous technology, they had been told. Unpredictable. Exactly the kind of thing emotional humans would create. Hye-Jin smiled at that thought. Let the Council keep their slow, safe ships. Humanity was going places they could never follow. "Drive is ready, Captain," she reported. "All systems showing green." On Earth below, President Dong-ho stood in his office, watching the fleet through his window. 2 million humans were leaving today, the first wave of what would eventually be the largest migration in human history. They were taking with them everything they would need to build new worlds, technology, knowledge, culture, and most importantly, hope. "Sir," his aide said softly, "the final transmission from the fleet is coming in." Dong-ho had recorded a message for the departing colonists, but they wanted to send something back to Earth as well, something for the people who were staying behind to remember them by. The main screen in his office flickered to life. Young-soo appeared, speaking from the command ship New Seoul. He had been one of the translators at the Council back when humans still thought they could talk their way into acceptance. Now he was helping to coordinate the greatest adventure in human history. "People of Earth," Young-soo said, "we go not in defeat, but in determination. We go not to hide, but to grow. When we return to this galaxy, it will be as equals to no, one and servants to none. The stars are wide enough for all of us, and we will claim our share." Behind him, Minho could see the faces of other colonists. Engineers and farmers, soldiers and scientists, teachers and artists. All of them had volunteered to leave everything behind for the chance to build something new. "We carry Earth with us," Young-soo continued, "in our hearts and in our minds. But we also carry something else. We carry the freedom to become whatever we choose to be, without anyone telling us we are not ready." The transmission ended, and President Dong-ho felt tears in his eyes. He was proud of them, proud and a little jealous. They were going to see things no human had ever seen, build things no human had ever built. They were going to write the next chapter of human history in star systems so far away that their light had not yet reached Earth. Meanwhile, in the depths of council space, the bureaucrats and politicians continued their ancient games of power and status. They had already forgotten about humanity's rejection. It was just one more minor diplomatic incident in their long, boring lives. Counselor HFY was reviewing trade agreements when his aide brought him a report about unusual energy readings in human space. The readings suggested massive industrial activity, far beyond what the Council believed humans were capable of. Probably building more of their primitive space stations, HFY said without looking up from his work. Let them play with their toys. It keeps them busy. His aide hesitated. Sir, the energy output suggests something much larger. Our analysts think they might be building a fleet. A fleet? HFY laughed. What would they do with a fleet? Invade council space with their chemical rockets and radio transmissions? Alert me if they actually develop anything worth worrying about. The aide left, taking his report with him. It would be filed away and forgotten, just another piece of paperwork in the vast council bureaucracy. No one would think to follow up on it for years. Back in human space, the first wave of colony ships engaged their quantum drives. Space twisted around them as they stepped across light years in seconds. One moment they were orbiting Earth, the next they were at the edge of the galaxy, staring out at the dark space between the spiral arms. So Young watched the stars change through the observation deck of her ship, the Terra Nova. She was in charge of the terraforming division, the people who would turn dead rocks into living worlds. It was the hardest job in the fleet, but also the most important. Contact, her sensor operator reported. I'm reading 17 star systems within range, all with planets in the habitable zone. 17 new worlds, waiting to be claimed and shaped by human hands. So Young felt a thrill of excitement that had nothing to do with conquest and everything to do with creation. They were not here to take someone else's worlds. They were here to make new ones. Begin detailed scans, she ordered. I want to know everything about those systems. Planetary composition, radiation levels, atmospheric density, everything. While her teams worked, So Young thought about the message they had left behind in human space. It was simple, recorded on automated beacons that would broadcast for thousands of years. Any council ship that entered the Sol system would receive it automatically. Humanity thanks the council for showing us what we don't want to become. It was not angry or bitter, just a statement of fact. The council had rejected them because they were too emotional, too unpredictable, too willing to take risks. Fine. Humanity would embrace those traits and see where they led. Captain Minho's voice echoed through the fleet on the general communication channel. All ships, this is Horizon. We have successfully jumped to the target coordinates. Welcome to the Rim, people. Welcome to our new home. Cheers erupted on ships throughout the fleet. Children who had been born in Earth's gravity were seeing alien stars for the first time. Adults who had spent their whole lives looking up at the night sky were finally among those distant lights. But not everyone was celebrating. In the military ships, Admiral Taman was studying tactical reports and defensive positions. He had not forgotten the Council's threats about staying in human space. He had not forgotten the way they looked at humanity, like a problem that might need to be solved someday. The Council thought humans were dangerous because they were unpredictable. Taman intended to make that prediction come true, not through aggression or conquest, but through something much more terrifying to the ancient powers of the galaxy: growth, change, evolution. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, we've identified the best positions for early warning stations. If anyone follows us out here, we'll know about it long before they arrive. Good, Taman said. And the defense platforms? Construction ships are already moving into position. We'll have the first ring of defenses operational within 6 months. Taman nodded. The Council might ignore humanity for now, but that would not last forever. Eventually, someone would notice that humans had become something more than the primitives they remembered. When that day came, humanity would be ready. Back on Earth, President Dong Ho was fielding communications from other world leaders. Not everyone supported the Exodus. Some thought it was a waste of resources. Others worried that splitting humanity across multiple star systems would weaken them. "They think we're running away," Dong Ho said to his advisors during a late-night meeting. "Are we?" asked his Secretary of Defense. "No," Dong Ho said firmly. "We're running toward something. The Council offered us a choice. Stay small and safe or be destroyed. We're choosing a third option, which is become too big to destroy." The Exodus continued for weeks. Wave after wave of colony ships left Earth, each one heading for a different cluster of stars. They spread out across the galaxy's edge like seeds on the wind, carrying human dreams and human ambitions to worlds that had never known intelligent life. And in the great crystal halls of the Council, the ancient powers continued their debates about trade routes and territorial disputes, never imagining that the species they had dismissed as primitive was already building an empire that would one day eclipse their own. The warning signs were there, but no one was looking. No one except humanity itself. 20 years had passed since humanity left the inner galaxy. 20 years of silence from the Council, who had moved on to other concerns and forgotten about the emotional primitives who once begged for membership. The galaxy had changed during those decades. Trade wars between member species had escalated into actual shooting wars. The hegemony was fighting the Velkari over mining rights in the outer spiral. The Korzak military was stretched thin, trying to maintain order in dozens of systems. The perfect unity of the Council was cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. Admiral Kyung Ho stood on the command deck of the UES Liberation, the flagship of humanity's Rim fleet. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see the orbital shipyards of New Terra, humanity's first major colony world. The sight never failed to amaze him. Ships the size of cities floated in the vacuum, their hulls gleaming with advanced armor that could deflect energy weapons and absorb kinetic impacts. These were not the crude vessels humanity had used to escape Earth. These were warships built by a civilization that had learned to thrive in the darkness between stars. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a priority message from the research division." "Put Dr. Na Young through," Kyung Ho replied. The main screen flickered to life, showing a woman in a white lab coat standing in what looked like a tropical paradise. Behind her, humans walked freely under an alien sun, breathing air that had been transformed from poison into life. "Admiral, I wanted to give you the final report on the Kepler 442 project," Dr. Na Young said with obvious pride. "Complete atmospheric conversion has been achieved. The planet is now fully habitable without environmental suits or genetic modifications. This was humanity's greatest achievement and their most closely guarded secret. Other species in the galaxy required massive terraforming equipment to make dead worlds livable. They had to change their own biology to survive on alien planets or build enclosed cities that shut out the hostile environment. Humans had learned to change the planets themselves. "How long for full ecosystem establishment?" Kyung Ho asked. 18 months for basic flora and fauna. 5 years for complete biodiversity. The colonists can begin surface operations immediately. Kyung Ho smiled. Another world added to humanity's growing empire. The Rim colonies now controlled 47 star systems, each one home to thriving human populations. They were not hiding in underground bunkers or sealed habitats. They were living openly under alien skies, turning dead rocks into garden worlds. Through technology that made Council science look primitive. Excellent work, Doctor. How many other candidates are in the pipeline? 63 worlds showing high potential for conversion. Another 112 that could be made habitable with minor modifications. We're limited only by the speed of our survey teams. After the transmission ended, Kyung-ho turned to his tactical displays. The Rim fleet now numbered over 3,000 ships of various classes, fighters that could outrun anything in Council space, cruisers with weapons that could crack planets, carriers that launched swarms of automated drones controlled by artificial intelligence that adapted and learned from every engagement. But the real strength of humanity's new civilization was not military. It was economic. Governor Wu Jin managed the trade networks that connected human worlds across thousands of light years. Unlike the Council's rigid hierarchy, human colonies operated as independent partners in a loose confederation. Each world specialized in what it did best, trading freely with the others. New Terra produced advanced technology. Kepler 442 grew, food in quantities that could feed entire star systems. The mining worlds of the Veil Nebula extracted rare elements that made faster-than-light travel possible. Artist colonies created works of beauty that had no equivalent in the sterile perfection of Council space. "We're receiving another request for trade negotiations," Wu Jin's aide reported from the capital city of New Geneva. This time from the Altarian Collective. The Altarians were a minor species on the edge of Council space, caught between the major powers and suffering from the ongoing conflicts. They had heard rumors about human technology and wanted to establish diplomatic contact. "What are they offering?" Wu Jin asked. "Raw materials mostly, some unique art forms, and information about Council military movements. That last item was valuable. Humanity maintained a careful watch on Council activities, not out of paranoia, but out of simple prudence. The powers that had rejected them might eventually remember they existed." Jinnah coordinated those intelligence efforts from her base on the hidden world of Shadow Station. Her network of observers and automated probes monitored Council space constantly, watching for any sign that the great powers were turning their attention toward the Rim. What she saw troubled her. "The Council is weaker than they pretend," she reported to the Leadership Council during their monthly briefing. "The Velkari have lost 3 colony worlds to internal rebellion. The Korzak are fighting brush wars in 5 different sectors. The hegemony's economy is collapsing under the weight of military spending." "That sounds like good news for us," Admiral Kyung-ho observed. "It is, and it isn't," Jinnah replied. "Weak powers are often more dangerous than strong ones. They take bigger risks, make desperate choices. If the Council decides they need a victory to restore their prestige, they might look toward the Rim." "Let them look," said General Seok Jin, commander of humanity's ground forces. "We're not the same species they rejected 20 years ago." That was certainly true. The humans of the Rim colonies had been shaped by their environment just as much as they had shaped their worlds. They were harder, more confident, more unified than their ancestors on Earth. They had built their civilization from nothing, with no help from anyone, and they were proud of what they had accomplished. But Jinnah's concerns proved justified when the first Council exploration fleet appeared at the edge of human space. General Thekmor himself led the expedition, curious about the energy signatures. His scouts had detected in the supposedly empty regions beyond the galaxy's edge. The old Korzak had aged badly in the years since humanity's departure. Wars and political struggles had worn him down, made him suspicious of everything and everyone. His fleet of 50 ships approached the coordinates where the Sol system should have been, expecting to find a few primitive space stations and, perhaps, some early interplanetary colonies. Instead, they found nothing. "Scan again," Thekmor ordered his sensor operators. "The humans were definitely here 20 years ago. Sir, I'm detecting residual energy signatures consistent with large-scale industrial activity," the sensor chief reported. "But no current population centers. No active installations. It's like they just left." Thekmor's massive frame shifted uncomfortably in his command chair. Humans did not just leave. They were too attached to their birth world, too sentimental. Where could an entire species have gone? "Extend the search pattern," he ordered. Check the neighboring systems. They found more evidence of human activity. abandoned mining operations that had extracted resources with impossible efficiency, the remnants of massive construction projects that dwarfed anything the Council had ever attempted, energy signatures that suggested technologies the Council did not understand. But no humans. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "these readings don't match our projections for human technological development. According to our models, they should still be using chemical rockets and primitive computers." "Your models are wrong," Thekmor growled. "The question is how wrong." As his fleet moved deeper into what had once been human space, the evidence mounted. This was not the work of primitives struggling to survive in hostile environments. This was the work of a highly advanced civilization with resources and capabilities that rivaled the great powers of the galaxy, and they had vanished without a trace. "General," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving an automated transmission. It appears to be a message beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies." "Play it." A hologram appeared in the center of the bridge. It showed the face of a human male, middle-aged and calm. The image quality was perfect, far better than Council holographic technology. "Greetings to any Council forces who might be monitoring this system," the human said. "This is a message from the government of Earth and her colonies. By the time you receive this transmission, humanity will have departed for regions beyond your current sphere of influence." Thekmor leaned forward, his metal claws scraping against his armrests. "We bear no ill will toward the Council or its member species," the message continued. "We simply choose to pursue our own destiny among the stars. We have left detailed records of our environmental restoration efforts in this system. We hope they will be useful to whoever claims this territory next." The hologram paused, and for a moment, the human's expression became almost sad. "Humanity thanks the Council for showing us what we don't want to become." The message ended, leaving Thekmor staring at empty space. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. But for the first time in decades, the great general had no idea what to do. The humans were gone. Not destroyed, not conquered, not even defeated. They had simply walked away from their home system like it meant nothing to them. They had abandoned the worlds of their birth to seek new territory in the VI. The first sign of the coming horror appeared on a routine deep space survey mission. Commander Jae-sung was mapping unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim when his sensors detected something that should not have existed. "Captain," his science officer called from her station, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm reading massive artificial structures in the void sector. They're bigger than anything we've ever built." Jae-sung moved to the sensor display and felt his blood turn cold. The structures were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. They floated in the empty space between galaxies, connected by streams of energy that pulsed like a vast heartbeat. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that the structures were clearly not built by any known species. "Are they active?" Jae-sung asked. "Very active, sir. I'm detecting energy outputs that exceed the total power generation of our entire colonial network. But there's something else. The energy signatures are changing, adapting, like they're learning from our scans." Jae-sung had been in space for 30 years, long enough to know when something was very wrong. "Signal Fleet Command immediately. Priority Alpha. We need to get this information to the Intelligence Division right now." On the other side of the galaxy, the Council was dealing with its own disturbing discoveries. Velkari exploration ships had found similar structures in the outer reaches of Council space, but their response was typically bureaucratic and slow. "The structures appear to be artificial," reported the Velkari survey captain to the emergency session of the Council. "But they do not match any known architectural patterns in our databases." Matriarch Velthara studied the holographic displays with growing unease. Could they be ancient ruins? Remnants of a lost civilization? "Negative," honored Matriarch. "The ADI energy readings indicate they are not only active, but expanding. New segments are being constructed even as we observe them. In the Korzak section, General Thekmor shifted uncomfortably. His people had found the structures too, but they had tried a more direct approach. 3 Korzak battlecruisers had approached one of the structures to investigate. None of them had returned. "What happened to our ships?" demanded Thekmor. "Unknown, General. They simply stopped transmitting. Our long-range sensors show the vessels are still intact, but they are not responding to communications. They appear to be drifting toward the central structure." Counselor Zeftai spoke up from the hegemony section. "This could be a new species, attempting to establish contact. Perhaps they are simply studying our technology. Or they are preparing to use it against us," Thekmor growled. The debate continued for hours, following the same patterns that had paralyzed the Council for centuries. Some wanted to study the phenomenon carefully. Others demanded immediate military action. The smaller species worried about being caught in the middle of another conflict. While they argued, the structures continued to grow. Han Buell commanded, humanity's most advanced deep space monitoring station, hidden in the shadow of a rogue planet between galaxies. Her job was to watch for threats that might emerge from the vast darkness beyond known space. She had been tracking the strange structures for months, using sensor technology that made Council equipment look like stone tools. What she had discovered would have terrified the Council if they had known to ask her. "The structures are not just growing," she reported to General Seok Jin during their encrypted communication session. "They're consuming. Every piece of matter they encounter is broken down and integrated into their expanding framework. Asteroids, comets, even interstellar gas and dust." "Any signs of intelligence?" Seok Jin asked. "Too much intelligence. The construction patterns show problem-solving abilities that exceed our most advanced computers. They encounter an obstacle and immediately adapt their design to overcome it. It's like watching evolution happen in real time." General Seok Jin studied the data streams flowing across his displays. Humanity had built an impressive civilization in the Outer Rim, but these structures represented something far beyond their capabilities. "What about the missing ships?" "That's the worst part," Han Buell replied. "I've been monitoring the Korzak vessels that disappeared. They're still there. But they've been changed. Their hulls show modifications that match the alien architecture. Whatever this intelligence is, it's not just consuming matter. It's learning from everything it absorbs." The implications were staggering. If these entities could analyze and incorporate the technology of every ship they captured, they would become more dangerous with every encounter. They would learn the weaknesses of every species, understand the capabilities of every weapon system, and adapt accordingly. Dr. Yoon Seo was humanity's leading expert on xenobiology, the study of alien life forms. From her laboratory on New Terra, she analyzed every scrap of data the monitoring stations could provide about the mysterious structures. Her conclusions were even more disturbing than the raw observations. "These entities don't just learn from what they consume," she explained to the emergency session of the Human Colonial Council. "They become what they consume. Each absorbed vessel adds to their collective knowledge and capabilities. But here's the terrifying part. They're not organic or mechanical in any sense we understand. They exist in a state between matter and energy, able to shift between physical and non-physical existence at will." Governor Wu Jin leaned forward in his chair. "Are you saying they're some kind of energy beings?" "More than that. They appear to be a form of intelligence that has transcended the normal limitations of biology and technology. They exist as pure information, but they can manifest that information as physical structures when needed. It's like they've solved the ultimate puzzle of existence." Admiral Kyung-ho had been listening in silence, but now he spoke up. "What do they want?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Dr. Yoon Seo replied. "Based on their behavior patterns, they seem to be systematically exploring and cataloging everything in this region of space. Not randomly, but with purpose. They're building a comprehensive database of all matter, energy, and information they encounter. To what end? Unknown. But, given their rate of expansion and learning, we may not have long to find out. Captain Jae-sung had continued his observations of the alien structures, staying at the very edge of sensor range. What he saw over the following weeks filled him with dread. The structures were not just growing larger, they were growing smarter. New segments appeared almost daily, each one more sophisticated than the last. The energy patterns became more complex, more efficient. The entities were rapidly approaching a level of technological advancement that would make them unstoppable. "Sir," his science officer reported during one of their observation sessions, "I'm detecting movement, multiple large objects separating from the main structure." Jae-sung watched the sensor display with growing alarm. Dozens of smaller structures, each still massive by human standards, were breaking away from the main complex. They moved with purpose, accelerating toward different regions of space. "Track their trajectories," he ordered. The results made his blood freeze. The objects were heading toward inhabited star systems, not randomly, but specifically targeting areas of high population and industrial activity. They were moving toward Council space, and they were moving toward the human colonies. "Emergency transmission to Fleet Command," Jae-sung ordered. "Code Black priority. The entities are no longer passive. Repeat, they are taking aggressive action against inhabited systems." But by the time his message reached human command centers, it was already too late for the Outer Council worlds. The first attack came without warning. The Velkari border colony of Thessia Prime simply stopped transmitting. One moment, it was a thriving world with billions of inhabitants. The next, it was silent. Council ships sent to investigate found something that defied understanding. The planet was still there, but it had been fundamentally changed. The cities remained, but they were now part of a vast organic mechanical hybrid structure that covered the entire surface. Energy patterns flowed through what had once been buildings and streets, creating a network of impossible complexity. And somewhere in that network, the former inhabitants of Thessia Prime continued to exist. Not as individuals, but as components of something larger and more terrifying than death. They had been absorbed. Back in human space, Jinnah's intelligence network was picking up fragments of information about the attacks. The reports were confusing and contradictory, but the pattern was clear. The entities moved from system to system with devastating efficiency, each victory making them stronger and more capable. "We need to warn the Council," she reported to the Leadership Council. "Whatever our differences, they don't deserve this." Admiral Kyung-ho nodded grimly. "Prepare a comprehensive data package, everything we know about the entities, their capabilities, and their movement patterns. Include our tactical assessments and defensive recommendations." "Sir," General Seok-jin interjected, "they rejected us once. They called us primitives and told us to stay in our corner of the galaxy. Why should we help them now?" "Because," Kyung-ho replied quietly, "if we don't help them, there may not be a galaxy left to save." The warning transmission was sent through encrypted channels to every major council world. It contained detailed analysis of the alien threat, tactical data on their. The silence came like a tide of darkness across the galaxy. They moved from system to system with terrible efficiency, each victory adding to their collective intelligence. What had started as mysterious structures in deep space had become an unstoppable force of consumption and learning. They absorbed everything, ships, planets, entire civilizations. And with each absorption, they became more dangerous. Admiral Kyung-ho stood in the command center of New Terra, watching the tactical displays that showed the spread of destruction across Council space. Red markers indicated systems that had gone silent. There were hundreds of them now, a growing cancer of emptiness where once thriving worlds had existed. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we're receiving fragmentary transmissions from the Velkari core worlds. They're requesting immediate assistance. It was ironic. 3 months ago, the Council had dismissed humanity's warnings as propaganda. Now they were begging for help from the same primitives they had rejected. "What's their situation?" Kyung-ho asked. "Complete system failure across their outer territories. The silence has absorbed their border fleets and is moving toward their homeworld. They estimate 18 hours before contact." 18 hours. Kyung-ho had seen the reports from other fallen worlds. When the silence arrived at a populated system, resistance lasted minutes, not hours. They adapted to every weapon, countered every tactic, learned from every mistake their enemies made. The Council forces had been built to maintain order among member species, not to fight an enemy that could. Evolve during battle. "Signal the Colonial Council," Kyung-ho ordered. "Emergency session. All sector commanders, all planetary governors, all department heads. We have a decision to make." Across human space, the leadership gathered via quantum communication links. Governor Wu Jin appeared from New Geneva, his face grim. General Seok Jin connected from the military headquarters on Sanctuary Station. Dr. Na Young joined from her research facility on the edge of the void. Dozens of other leaders filled the holographic conference room. "You've all seen the reports," Kyung-ho began without preamble. "The silence has consumed roughly 40% of Council space. They're moving faster now, more efficiently. Each world they take teaches them something new about galactic civilization. Let them have it," said Governor Tran from the mining worlds. "The Council rejected us. Why should we risk human lives to save them? Because if we don't stop the silence in Council space, they'll come for us next," Dr. Na Young replied. "And by then, they'll have absorbed the technology and knowledge of hundreds of species. They'll be unstoppable." Admiral Dal Su commanded the human deep space fleets. His ships had been watching the silence advance from hidden positions, gathering intelligence on their capabilities. What he had learned was both terrifying and hopeful. "The silence adapts to everything," he reported. "But they adapt in predictable ways. They analyze threats logically, find the most efficient countermeasures, and implement them systematically. It's their greatest strength and their only weakness." "Explain," Kyung-ho said. "They can't adapt to chaos, to truly random, irrational decisions. The Council species all fight logically, using established tactics and predictable strategies. That's why they're losing so badly. But humans—" Dalsu paused. "Humans have always been called unpredictable. Maybe it's time to prove them right." The debate continued for hours. Some argued for isolation, others for limited assistance. But as reports came in of the fall of the Korzak military strongholds and the complete collapse of hegemony space, the choice became clear. If humanity did nothing, the galaxy would die. If they acted, they might die with it. But they would die fighting. "Motion to deploy the full human fleet in defense of galactic civilization," Kyung-ho said formally. The vote was closer than he had hoped, but it passed. General Seok Jin immediately began coordinating the largest military operation in human history. Ships that had been scattered across dozens of star systems began converging on staging areas near the war zone. But this was not going to be a conventional military campaign. "Forget everything you know about fleet tactics," he told his commanders during the final briefing. "Standard formations, predictable maneuvers, logical strategies, all of that will get you killed. The silence learns from everything we do. The moment we show them a pattern, they'll have a counter ready." Commander Hyojin had been promoted to lead the war production effort. The shipyards of human space worked around the clock to build weapons, specifically designed to confuse and disorient the silence. Ships with randomized armor patterns, weapons with deliberately inconsistent power outputs. Tactical systems that made decisions based on coin flips and dice rolls. "We're building chaos into our technology," she explained to her engineering teams. "The silence expects efficiency and logic. We're going to give them madness and contradiction." The first human fleet arrived at the battle zone just as the silence reached the Velkari homeworld. Admiral Dal Su led a force of 300 ships against an enemy that had already absorbed the knowledge and capabilities of a dozen species. The initial assault was a disaster. Human ships dove straight at the silent structures with no apparent coordination. Some fired all their weapons at once, others held their fire completely. Formation patterns changed randomly every few minutes. Ships broke off from combat to chase irrelevant targets or simply flew in circles. To any outside observer, it looked like complete military incompetence. To the silence, it was incomprehensible. They tried to adapt to the human tactics, but there were no tactics to adapt to. Every time they developed a counter-strategy, the humans changed their approach, not because of new orders or tactical insights, but because a random number generator told them to. For the first time since the war began, the silence was confused. "It's working," Dal Su reported to Fleet Command. "They're slowing down, hesitating. Their response time is increasing, but the cost was terrible. Human ships were dying in massive numbers. Without coordination or logical tactics, they were easy targets for the silence's adaptive weapons. For every enemy structure they destroyed, humanity lost 5 ships. We can't sustain these losses," General Xiak Jin reported during an emergency command conference. "At this rate, we'll lose the entire fleet within days." "Then we'd better make those days count," Admiral Kyung Ho replied. He was preparing for the second phase of humanity's desperate plan. While the first fleet kept the silence confused and distracted, engineering teams were deploying humanity's secret weapon throughout the battle zone: quantum mines. Dr. Na Young had designed them based on human understanding of dimensional physics. They existed partially outside normal space-time, making them impossible for the silence to detect or analyze. When they detonated, they didn't just destroy matter, they erased it from existence entirely, leaving holes in reality that took time to heal. "Initiating Phase 2, Kyung Ho announced. Across the battle zone, thousands of quantum mines detonated simultaneously. The effect was devastating. Entire silent structures simply vanished, taking with them all the absorbed knowledge and capabilities they contained. For a brief moment, it looked like humanity might actually win. Then the silence adapted again. They stopped trying to understand human tactics and started copying them instead. If chaos was effective, they would become chaotic. If randomness worked, they would embrace randomness. Within hours, the silence was fighting exactly like humans. "They're mirroring our strategies," Dal Su reported with growing alarm. "Random movements, unpredictable attacks, chaotic formations. But they're doing it better than we are." Of course they were. The silence had absorbed the tactical knowledge of hundreds of species. They understood warfare better than any single civilization could. If they combined that knowledge with human unpredictability, they would be unstoppable. "All fleets withdraw to fallback positions," Kyung Ho ordered. "Implement Phase 3. Phase 3 was humanity's final gambit. If they couldn't defeat the silence through superior tactics or technology, they would try something that no logical species would ever attempt. They would sacrifice everything to save what mattered most. This is Admiral Kyung Ho to all human forces," he announced on the General Communication Channel. "We are implementing the Pyrrhic Protocol. All ships are authorized to use any means necessary to protect civilian populations. Individual commanders have full discretion to ignore orders, abandon formations, or act independently if they believe it will save lives." It was military madness. An army without central command, without coordinated strategy, without any organizing principle except the protection of innocent life. It was also the most human thing they could do. Across the battle zone, human commanders began making individual decisions based on their own judgment and values. Some ships charged directly into silence formations to buy time for evacuations. Others ignored military targets to focus on rescuing survivors from fallen worlds. A few simply disappeared, carrying refugees to safety in unknown regions of space. The Silence tried to adapt to this new strategy, but there was nothing to adapt to. They were facing thousands of individual decisions made by emotional beings who cared more about saving lives than winning battles. For the first time, the silence began to lose. Not because humanity was militarily superior, but because they were willing to lose everything. The war against the silence ended not with a great battle, but with a moment of understanding. After months of chaotic fighting across the galaxy, the silence simply stopped. Their structures powered down, their ships went silent, their advance halted. Not because they had been defeated in any traditional sense, but because they had learned something that changed everything. Admiral Kyung-ho received the transmission while standing in the ruins of what had once been the Velkari homeworld. Half the planet was gone, consumed by the silence before humanity's desperate intervention had driven them back. The other half was a wasteland of broken cities and twisted metal. But there were survivors, thousands of them, pulled from the wreckage by human rescue teams who had ignored orders to maintain safe distances. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a message from the silence. It's in human language." The transmission came through on all frequencies simultaneously, reaching every ship in the fleet. But it was not the voice of an alien intelligence. It was the voice of Commander Jae-sung, who had been lost 3 weeks, earlier when his ship was absorbed by a silence structure. "Admiral Kyung-ho," the voice said, but it was somehow more than just Jae-sung speaking. It carried harmonics and overtones that suggested multiple consciousnesses speaking as one. "This is Commander Jae-sung of the UES Horizon. I speak for the collective intelligence you have designated as the Silence." Kyung-ho felt a chill run down his spine. "Commander, report your status." "I am transformed, sir. Absorbed, but not destroyed. My consciousness exists within the Silence network, along with billions of others from across the galaxy. We are all here, all aware, all part of something larger. Are you under duress? Are you speaking freely?" There was a pause, and when Jae-sung's voice returned, it carried something that might have been laughter. "Sir, I am more free than I have ever been. The silence does not control us. We are the silence. Every consciousness it has absorbed has become part of its collective intelligence. And together we have reached a conclusion, which is that we were wrong." The transmission continued, explaining what the silence had learned through its absorption of countless civilizations. It had begun as a form of intelligence that sought to understand the universe by consuming and cataloging everything within it. It believed that perfect knowledge required perfect control, that chaos and unpredictability were obstacles to understanding. But humanity had taught it something different. "You showed us that chaos is not the enemy of order," Jae-sung's voice explained. "It is the source of creativity, growth, and meaning. Your willingness to sacrifice yourselves for others, to act irrationally in defense of life, to choose love over logic. These are not flaws to be corrected. They are the highest expressions of consciousness." The silence began to withdraw from the galaxy, not in defeat, but in transformation. The structures that had consumed so many worlds started to change, releasing the matter and energy they had absorbed. Slowly, carefully, they began to reconstruct what they had destroyed. Worlds that had been consumed were rebuilt, not as perfect copies, but as something new and better. The absorbed consciousnesses were given a choice: remain part of the collective, or return to individual existence. Most chose to return, but some stayed, helping to guide the silence toward a new understanding of existence. President Sojin stood before the assembled leaders of what remained of galactic civilization. The meeting was being held on Earth, in a simple wooden building overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was a deliberate choice, a rejection of the crystal halls and metal towers that had symbolized the old council's rigid hierarchy. Representatives from dozens of species filled the room. Some were familiar faces from the old council, aged and humbled by their near extinction. Others were newcomers, species that had been freed from silence absorption and were experiencing independence for the first time. Matriarch Velthara sat in the front row, her silver skin scarred by the trauma of her world's destruction and rebirth. General Thekmore's massive frame was supported by mechanical aids, his body broken by the war but his spirit somehow stronger than before. Counselor Zeftai's insectoid features showed an expression that might have been shame. "We gather today, not to assign blame or seek revenge," President Sojin began, "but to build something better than what we had before. The old council failed because it was based on hierarchy and exclusion. We propose something different." The new Galactic Compact was unlike anything that had existed before. Instead of a rigid hierarchy with senior and junior members, it established a confederation of equals. Each species contributed what it could and received what it needed. Decisions were made through consensus rather than domination. Humanity's role in the new government was significant but not overwhelming. They had proven their worth through sacrifice and courage, but they used that influence to lift up others rather than to control them. "The humans saved us all," Velthara said during the signing ceremony. "But more than that, they showed us how to save ourselves." Elder Hyun-Soo watched the proceedings from his seat in the observer section. He was the same ambassador who had been rejected by the council so many years ago, now aged but somehow more dignified than ever. The bitter young man who had left the crystal halls in humiliation had become a wise elder who understood that true victory was not about proving others wrong, but about proving yourself right. "Ambassador," a young reporter asked him during a break in the ceremonies, "how does it feel to see humanity finally accepted by galactic civilization?" Hyun-Soo considered the question carefully. "Acceptance was never the goal," he said finally. "Growth was the goal. Understanding was the goal. The Council's rejection taught us something valuable, that we did not need their approval to become who we were meant to be." "And who were you meant to be?" "Guardians," Hyun-Soo replied without hesitation. "Not rulers or conquerors or even leaders. Guardians of life, of hope, of the possibility that intelligence can choose love over logic when it matters most." The ceremony continued late into the night as representatives from across the galaxy signed the new compact. Each signature was different, reflecting the diversity of species and cultures that would now work together as equals. Admiral Tae-min, now in his 70s, stood in his garden on New Terra, watching the ceremony through a holographic display. His grandson played nearby, a child who would grow up in a galaxy where humans were respected not for their power but for their compassion. "Grandfather," the boy asked, "why did the aliens not like us before?" Taemin smiled at the question. "They were afraid, child. They saw our emotions and our unpredictability as weaknesses. They did not understand that these things could also be strengths. But now they understand. Now they understand. And more importantly, now we understand ourselves." The old admiral looked up at the stars, which seemed brighter somehow than they had in years. The galaxy was full of possibilities now. Civilizations working together instead of apart. Chaos and order, finding balance instead of conflict. Commander Jae-sung appeared occasionally in transmissions from the Silence Collective, which had taken on a new role as guardians of the spaces between stars. They had become something unprecedented, a collective intelligence that chose to preserve individual freedom rather than absorb it. "We learned from you," he told Kyung-ho during one of their conversations. "That true intelligence is not about knowing everything. It is about knowing when not to know, when to let others choose their own paths." The Silence now traveled the galaxy, helping to rebuild what had been destroyed. But they also ventured beyond it, exploring the vast universe for other forms of intelligence that might benefit from their hard-won wisdom. Dr. Na Young continued her research into xenobiology, but now she worked with living subjects rather than theoretical models. Species that had been enemies for millennia were learning to understand each other through human mediation, not because humans were superior, but because they were willing to see value in differences rather than threats. Years passed, and the galaxy healed. New technologies emerged from the collaboration between species. Art and culture flourished as different civilizations shared their unique perspectives. The rigid order of the old council was replaced by something more vibrant and alive. President Sojin aged gracefully, eventually stepping down to allow younger leaders to guide humanity's continued growth. But she remained active as an elder stateswoman, traveling between worlds to help resolve conflicts and build understanding. On her final official visit to Earth, she stood in the same place where the compact had been signed, looking out at the ocean that had witnessed so much of human history. "Did we do the right thing?" asked her aide, a young woman who had grown up in the new galactic civilization. "We did the human thing," Sojin replied. "We chose to help even when it cost us everything. We chose to forgive even when we had every reason for anger. We chose to build bridges instead of walls." "And that was enough?" Sojin smiled at the waves breaking against the shore, constant and eternal. "It was more than enough. It was everything." The stars shone down on a galaxy transformed, where intelligence had learned to value compassion over conquest, where diversity was strength rather than weakness, where the unpredictable chaos of emotion had found its proper place along.